The carriage wheels cracked against the frozen path, the sound echoing across the desolate expanse of white. Snowflakes swirled in the air, drifting like fragments of secrets untold, and beyond the veil of the storm rose a palace carved from ice itself. Its spires glistened with a cold, blue light, taller than any cathedral, and each surface shimmered as though holding the reflections of every hidden desire that had ever passed through its halls. Illyra pulled her fur cloak tighter around her shoulders as the driver drew the horses to a halt before the grand staircase. She had heard stories of this place, the Ice Palace, built centuries ago as both fortress and playground for rulers whose tastes leaned toward the extravagant and the forbidden. Tonight, however, it belonged to the Duke of Northreach, a man whose reputation was as elusive as the wind that whispered through the tundra. As Illyra stepped down, the crunch of her boots on snow was the only sound until the massive crystal doors opened. Warm golden light spilled into the night, revealing a hall lined with chandeliers that seemed to hang not from the ceiling but from frozen stalactites of pure ice. The sudden shift from the howling storm to this cocoon of opulence left her breathless. A man awaited her inside, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a coat of midnight velvet. His eyes caught her immediately, pale, sharp, as though they had seen through countless masks and lies. "Lady Illyra," he said, bowing low. His voice resonated with a smooth, dangerous charm. "Welcome to the Ice Palace." She inclined her head, her gloved fingers brushing the clasp at her throat. "Your Grace," she murmured, studying him. This was no ordinary invitation. Only the select few received summons to his winter gatherings, and rumor whispered that more than wine and dance were offered within these crystalline walls. As he extended his arm, she slipped her hand over it, allowing him to lead her deeper into the hall. Every corner shimmered with artistry, statues of lovers entwined, their forms carved from blocks of ice so flawless they looked ready to stir to life, archways glowing faintly as though infused with northern lights, and a music drifting through the chamber that seemed born of wind and water. Guests mingled in masks of silver and sapphire, their laughter soft, their whispers sharper. Illyra felt the weight of eyes upon her, curious, assessing, inviting. She had come prepared, though she kept her own mask low, feathers of white concealing most of her face. The air was thick with perfume and anticipation. The Duke leaned closer, his breath warm against the edge of her ear. "Do you feel it already? The palace is alive. Every wall remembers the confessions made here, every floor the footsteps of lovers who dared to chase their hunger beneath this roof." A shiver ran through her, though whether from his words or the faint chill that lingered in the hall she could not say. "And what confession would you have me make, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. His lips curved, almost imperceptibly. "None yet. Secrets do not yield themselves so easily. But perhaps," his eyes held hers, intense and unrelenting. "Perhaps the palace will coax them free." A servant offered them crystal goblets filled with a liquid that glowed faintly blue, like captured moonlight. Illyra accepted hers, sipping cautiously. The taste was unlike any wine she knew, sweet at first, then sharp, as though awakening something dormant. Heat bloomed at the back of her throat, warming her more than the firelight ever could. The Duke guided her onto a balcony overlooking a lower hall where dancers moved in slow circles, their gowns flowing like water, their partners' hands resting a touch too long at waists and shoulders. A single violin played, the notes stretching thin, aching with longing. "Why am I here?" Illyra asked, the question slipping past her lips before she could restrain it. He did not look at her immediately, instead, he studied the dancers below. Finally, he turned, his gaze locking hers once more. "Because the Ice Palace hungers for those who carry secrets worth unveiling." And I believe, Lady Illyra, he reached for her hand, ungloving it with a smooth, deliberate motion. The cold air nipped at her skin, but his touch was fire. You carry more than most. Her pulse quickened. The palace seemed to breathe around them, the walls glistening brighter, the chandeliers trembling with a soundless note. Somewhere, deep within its frozen heart, something stirred, as though listening. And Illyra, drawn into the Duke's steady grasp, realized she had stepped not only into a palace of ice, but into a labyrinth of temptation and revelation, one that might never let her go. The warmth of the Duke's hand lingered against Illyra's bare skin long after he released her. She flexed her fingers, trying to steady the racing beat in her chest. The balcony's railing beneath her palm was carved from translucent ice, smooth as glass, and she thought she could hear something faint beneath the music, whispers threading through the frozen walls, as though the palace itself breathed words too soft for the human ear. Illyra. His voice drew her back. The Duke had stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow space. Do you hear it? She hesitated, glancing at him. The music. No, he said, his pale eyes glinting with a knowing light. The palace. Her lips parted, but no reply came. Instead, she strained her senses. The violin still mourned in the distance, the dancers still drifted like shadows, yet beneath it all, something else stirred. A susurrus, almost like sighs carried through ice caverns, beckoning. The Duke leaned his forearm on the railing, watching her intently. The ice palace is not merely walls and stone. It remembers, and it whispers. If you listen closely, it will tell you what it desires. The thought unsettled her, but curiosity burned brighter than fear. She forced herself to meet his gaze. And what does it desire of me? That, he said, brushing a strand of her dark hair back into place with a touch that lingered against her temple, you must discover for yourself. Her body betrayed her with a tremor. His hand was gone in an instant, yet its absence felt heavier than its presence. Illyra drew a slow breath, trying to summon her composure, though the palace itself seemed to conspire against her. The wine in her veins, the warmth of his nearness, the whispers through the walls, they all tugged at the hidden places she had sworn never to expose. Before she could speak, a servant in silver livery approached and bowed. Your Grace. The moonlight procession is ready. The Duke inclined his head, then turned to Illyra. You will walk with me. She allowed him to take her hand once more, his fingers cool yet commanding around hers, and together they descended a staircase carved in spirals of clear ice. At its base stretched another hall, vast, arched, and filled with guests who had gathered in two perfect lines. Torches flickered against the walls, their flames bending strangely, casting shapes that seemed almost alive. The procession began. At the far end of the hall, doors opened to reveal masked figures in robes of pale silver. They carried lanterns that glowed with blue fire, the light reflecting across the floor until it looked as though they all stood upon a frozen lake. The music shifted, deeper drums, slower, each beat reverberating through Illyra's chest. They honor the palace, the Duke explained softly. The procession is both ritual and offering. What do they offer? She asked, her voice hushed as though afraid to disturb the air. Their silence, he answered. Their restraint. For every desire they deny in the open, the palace grants them one night where walls and rules no longer matter. Illyra's breath caught. The whispers pressed closer to her ears, as if agreeing. She could almost distinguish words now, fragments, promises, temptations. Her pulse drummed faster. As the procession passed, the guests dispersed into hidden corridors, laughter and murmured anticipation trailing behind. The Duke guided Illyra not toward them, but down a narrower hall where icy sconces burned with ghostly blue light. The air grew colder, sharper, the whispers clearer. Finally, he stopped before a tall door carved with frost-laced symbols. He traced one with his gloved finger, and the ice pulsed faintly as though alive. "This chamber," he said, "chooses who may enter. Few have heard its call. Tonight, it calls for you." Illyra's throat tightened. "Why me?" He regarded her for a long moment, then stepped closer until the chill of the door mingled with the heat radiating from his body. "Because you carry a secret, Lady Illyra. One that the palace craves." The door groaned and parted slightly, releasing a draft of air so cold it seared her lungs. Yet within that chill came something else, a pull, undeniable and magnetic. Her heart thundered as she looked into the Duke's eyes. He did not press her, only watched, as though certain she would step forward. And perhaps he was right, for even as fear coiled through her, her feet moved of their own accord. She crossed the threshold, the door closing behind her with a crystalline sigh. Inside, the chamber was vast and hollow, lit by walls of ice that glowed from within. The whispers here were louder, almost like voices layered atop one another, pressing against her mind. In the center of the room stood a single mirror, its frame sculpted from frozen vines, its surface misted with frost. Illyra drew nearer, compelled. The mirror cleared as she approached, revealing not her reflection, but an image she thought buried forever, herself, younger, trembling in a moment she had sworn never to remember. The palace had reached into her past. And she knew, with a shiver, that the Duke had been right. Her secret was no longer hers alone. Illyra's breath clouded before her as she stared at the mirror. The surface shimmered, swirling with threads of mist until the image sharpened again, her, years younger, draped in silks, her lips pressed to another's in the shadowed alcove of a summer palace. The stolen kiss had been desperate, forbidden, and it ended with her pulling away in fear, leaving behind more than just desire. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It cannot," but the mirror did not lie. It replayed the scene with cruel clarity. She saw her trembling hands, the warmth of that mouth against hers, the lingering glance of longing that had haunted her ever since. From the corner of the chamber, the Duke's voice carried, calm yet sharp. "The palace remembers more than walls and footsteps. It remembers the heart." She whirled toward him, her mask of poise cracking. "You knew." His pale eyes reflected the icy glow, unreadable. "I suspected." He approached, unhurried, until he stood at her side, his gaze fixed on the mirror. "The palace confirms." The whispers pressed closer, curling around her like invisible hands. Illyra's chest tightened. "Why show me this? Why tear open what I buried?" The Duke's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Because secrets are chains, Lady Illyra. And chains cannot bind forever." His voice dropped, a low murmur that threaded through her pulse. "Here, they break. Or they consume you." Her reflection shifted again. Now she saw herself alone, pacing her chambers with restless nights, always haunted by the memory of that forbidden touch. A secret she carried like frost in her blood, numbing and burning all at once. Illyra shut her eyes, but the image remained seared into her mind. The Duke's nearness unsettled her further, his warmth, his certainty, the way he seemed to stand as both judge and confidant. "And what of your secrets, your grace?" she demanded, forcing steel into her tone. "Does the palace not crave them too?" His lips curved slightly. "It does. But the palace has a patience with me it may not extend to you." That answer only deepened the ache in her chest. The whispers swelled, a chorus urging her to confess, to surrender, to release. Her pride fought against it, yet the longer she resisted, the colder the chamber became, as though punishing her silence. Finally, she turned back to the mirror, her voice trembling. I loved someone I was never meant to love. I wanted them in ways I could never admit. And when I had the chance, I fled. Her throat tightened, the words tearing free like shards of ice. I fled because I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean, of what I would become if I surrendered. The mirror shimmered, as if absorbing her confession. The whispers quieted, softening into sighs. Warmth crept back into the chamber, though the frost still glittered around her feet. The Duke stepped closer, so near she felt the brush of his coat against her arm. And does the fear still hold you now? Her heart pounded. She turned to him, meeting the intensity of his gaze. Perhaps, she admitted. But not as it once did. The chamber seemed to breathe, the icy walls pulsing faintly with light. The Duke lifted his hand, brushing the edge of her mask. His gloved fingers traced the curve of her cheek, pausing at the tie that held it in place. Then perhaps it is time you shed more than one disguise. Every instinct screamed caution, yet her body leaned into his touch. Slowly, deliberately, he untied the mask, letting it slip down. The air kissed her bare skin, cold yet liberating. His eyes swept over her unveiled face with a hunger carefully leashed. Illyra, he said, her name roughened in his throat, you are not the only one who fled something once. Her breath caught. He turned back to the mirror and for the first time, its mist shifted not for her, but for him. The glass revealed the Duke, younger, standing in a hall of firelit stone, a crown upon his brow, yet his expression hollow. By his side, a woman knelt, her face hidden, his hand hovering above her shoulder but never daring to touch. The image froze, his restraint etched in ice. Illyra's eyes widened. Your secret, she whispered. His jaw tightened. A hunger denied. A loyalty chosen over desire. The mirror shimmered, holding both their truths side by side. The whispers rose again, but this time not as torment they were urging, coaxing, weaving their secrets together like threads in frozen glass. And for the first time since she stepped into the palace, Illyra felt not just fear or temptation, but a dangerous sense of kinship. The ice palace had begun binding them. The mirror dimmed, its frost veiling the secrets it had revealed. For a long while, Illyra and the Duke stood side by side in silence, the hush of the chamber heavy as snowfall. The air had shifted. It was no longer simply her burden on display, nor his it was something shared, tangled, undeniable. Illyra felt the pull to speak, to ask about the woman in the mirror, but the Duke broke the quiet first. The palace is never satisfied with only a glimpse. Once it tastes a secret, it hungers for more. As if in answer, the walls themselves groaned, their glow intensifying. A fissure appeared at the far side of the chamber, spreading like a crack in glass until it opened into a corridor that hadn't been there before. The whispers beckoned. The Duke extended his hand. Will you walk further with me? Her instincts battled. She had already offered more truth than she had in years, yet the palace demanded more, and so did something inside her. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, almost possessive, as though he would not allow her to turn back even if she wished to. They stepped into the new corridor. It was narrower, the walls closer, glowing faintly with shifting patterns that resembled shadows moving beneath ice. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, not just surrounding them but echoing within their bones. Words brushed her ears, her name, fragments of confessions, pleas for touch, gasps of pleasure. The voices tangled until she couldn't tell which belonged to her thoughts and which belonged to the palace. "This is the Chamber of Echoes," the Duke said, his voice low but firm, anchoring her against the tide. "Here, every hidden desire speaks." Her heart thudded. Even if unspoken. Especially then. The corridor widened suddenly into a vast round hall. Its ceiling arched high, frost dripping like chandeliers of frozen tears. In the center, a pool of ice reflected their forms, though in the reflection they stood closer, his hand at her waist, her lips parted as though ready to yield. Illyria tore her gaze away, heat rising beneath her skin. The palace wanted her hunger exposed, and she feared how much truth it would reveal. The Duke stepped behind her, his breath grazing her ear. "The palace reveals only what already lives inside you. It does not invent, only magnifies." Her pulse quickened. "And what does it magnify in you?" His paws stretched, charged, before he answered. "The restraint I've carried too long." His words sent a tremor through her. The whispers surged, echoing his confession, and the reflection in the pool deepened. Now it showed him leaning into her, his lips brushing her throat, her eyes fluttering closed. She could almost feel it, phantom heat sparking across her skin. "Illyria," he murmured, her name rough in his throat. "Do you see?" "Yes," she whispered, though the word was nearly stolen by the echoes. The temptation clawed at her. "Step closer, surrender, let the palace strip her bare." Yet a part of her fought still, clutching at dignity, at the fear of being consumed. "If I give myself to this, to you, will the palace ever release me?" His hands brushed her shoulders, light but searing. "It may not. But tell me, would you truly wish to leave untouched by it?" She closed her eyes. The pool shimmered brighter, showing not hesitation but abandon, her lips claiming his arms encircling her, both of them lost. The vision shook her, because it wasn't fantasy. It was desire given form. The whispers reached a fever pitch, dozens of voices weaving into one command: surrender. Illyria opened her eyes, her body trembling, and turned her face toward his. The Duke was already watching her, his eyes pale fire, his composure fraying. For a suspended moment, the chamber held its breath. But instead of closing the distance, he stepped back, releasing her shoulders. The whispers dulled instantly, as though disappointed. Her lips parted in protest, though she bit back the sound. The Duke's gaze was fierce, conflicted. "Not yet," he said, his tone rough with restraint. "The palace must not take what is not freely given. Desire is only power when chosen." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. He was right. The palace could tempt, could echo, could expose, but her will remained her own. And yet, as the chamber dimmed, she knew that choice was growing more fragile by the moment. The fissure opened again, revealing another path deeper into the heart of the ice palace. The air that poured through was colder, sharper, yet threaded with the unmistakable heat of anticipation. The Duke met her gaze, silent question in his eyes. And Illyria, pulse unsteady, nodded once. She would walk further still. The corridor narrowed again, winding like the throat of some vast frozen beast. Illyria's steps echoed softly, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the pressing silence. The air grew colder with each step, sharp against her skin despite her cloak. Yet beneath the chill was an undercurrent of warmth, subtle, enticing, like an ember hidden under snow. The Duke's hand steadied her elbow as they emerged into another chamber. This one was unlike the others, vast, circular, its walls shimmering with veins of fire trapped within ice. Flickering orange light danced across the glassy surface, so that frost and flame coexisted in fragile balance. Illyra shivered. "What is this place?" "The trial of flame and frost," the Duke answered. His tone carried weight, almost reverence. "Every guest who reaches this depth must face it. Few succeed." Her heart gave a startled kick. "Face what?" He gestured toward the chamber's center, where two pedestals of crystal rose side by side. Upon one burned a flame, steady and golden, though no wood fed it. Upon the other rested a sphere of pure ice, glowing faintly blue. Between them stretched a shallow ring of frozen water, like a boundary waiting to be crossed. "The palace tests desire and fear," he said softly. "The flame consumes what is denied. The frost preserves what is confessed. One cannot leave this chamber without choosing." Illyra stared, uncertain whether to step forward or retreat. "And what if I refuse?" The Duke's eyes held hers. "Then the palace keeps you. It is merciless to indecision." The whispers returned, stronger now, curling around her like smoke. They urged her forward, coaxing, taunting. Fragments of her secret, of the forbidden kiss from years ago, fluttered in her mind like snowflakes melting too fast to hold. Illyra drew in a shaking breath. "And what of you? Will you choose as well?" "I already have," he said, his voice low, roughened by something deeper than the cold. "But the palace will not release us until you do." Her gaze flicked to the flame, then the frost. Fire and ice, hunger and restraint. Confession and concealment. Her every instinct warned that whichever she touched would reshape her fate. The Duke stepped closer, his presence grounding her even as it unsettled her further. "Listen to yourself, Illyra. The palace amplifies what already exists in you. What do you fear more, that your desire consumes you, or that you bury it until it freezes your soul?" Her throat tightened. The whispers pressed harder. Images filled her vision, the kiss she once fled, the ache of solitude that followed, and now the Duke, his touch, his gaze, the promise he carried without words. She stepped into the ring, the frozen surface cracking softly underfoot but holding her weight. The flame flickered brighter, the ice sphere pulsed faintly. Her hand trembled as she reached out, torn between them. The fire promised release, the chance to burn away fear. The ice promised preservation, the safety of restraint. "Illyra," the Duke's voice reached her, steady, commanding yet tinged with hunger. "Do not let fear decide for you again." Her heart slammed against her ribs. With a cry half born of desperation, half of surrender, she pressed her palm against the sphere of ice. A surge of cold shot through her veins, stealing her breath. The whispers swelled, triumphant, and the chamber flared with blue light. Her vision blurred, filled with fragments of her self-desires preserved, not destroyed, frozen but unyielding. She staggered, nearly falling, but the Duke caught her. His arms wrapped around her, strong, steady, pulling her against his chest. His warmth contrasted sharply with the chill searing her body, and for a moment she thought she might shatter in his grasp. But then the frost settled, no longer painful but clarifying. The whispers faded, leaving only silence and the sound of her heartbeat. The Duke lowered his head, his lips brushing her temple, a touch more intimate than anything yet. "You chose preservation," he murmured. "You chose to hold, not to destroy." Her breath trembled. "Does that make me weak?" He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his own pale fire burning with certainty. "No. It makes you dangerous. A flame burns quickly, but ice endures. Your desire will not vanish, it will wait. And when you release it, it will not be fleeting. It will consume us both. Her body quivered against his, not from the cold but from the truth of his words. The chamber pulsed once more, then quieted, satisfied. The fissure reappeared in the far wall, a new passage revealed. The Duke's hand lingered at her waist longer than needed. The palace has accepted your choice. But it will test you again. Illyra nodded, though her pulse still raced. She knew, now more than ever, that the deeper she went, the less she could deny herself. And somewhere in the frozen shadows ahead, temptation waited, sharper and hungrier than before. The fissure widened to reveal a stairway carved from ice, its steps faintly glowing as though lit from within. Illyra and the Duke descended together, their footsteps muffled, the silence heavy with everything they had not yet spoken. Each level seemed to draw them deeper into the palace's heart, where walls no longer gleamed blue-white but shimmered with shifting hues, as if the aurora itself had been trapped beneath the frozen surface. The whispers returned low, coaxing, indistinct at first, then sharpening into words that made Illyra's pulse falter. Touch him. Confess. Yield. She pressed her lips together, but her body betrayed her with a tremor. At the base of the stairs stretched a chamber unlike any before. Its walls bent in gentle arcs, glowing like ice-polished mirrors, reflecting their images 100-fold. But the reflections didn't mimic perfectly. In some, she and the Duke stood closer, in others, his hand lingered at her waist, his lips brushing her neck, in yet more, they were entwined entirely, faces alight with abandon. Illyra's breath caught. They're not real. The Duke's voice was quiet, almost rough. Not yet. She turned to him, startled by the intensity in his tone. His eyes flicked to one reflection where he held her flush against him, his mouth pressed to hers. For a fleeting instant, she saw not just desire in his expression but torment, as though the palace had torn away his restraint and shown what he fought hardest to hide. The whispers surged, overlapping, relentless. Why resist? You are already his. He is already yours. Her chest tightened, torn between fear and longing. It's too much, she whispered. The Duke moved closer, not touching her yet, but near enough that his presence pressed against her senses. The palace strips us bare, Illyra. But it cannot decide for us. That power remains ours. Her gaze darted to another reflection, this one showing her hands clutching his coat, drawing him down to her lips. The heat in her cheeks betrayed how easily she could imagine it. And if we choose wrong, she asked. Then the palace devours us. His words were steady, but his jaw was tight. But if we choose truth, he broke off, his breath roughened. Then it will set us free. Silence stretched, the chamber vibrating faintly as though it waited. The whispers grew louder, weaving into something like a chant. Illyra's heart pounded. Every reflection around her seemed to lean closer, urging her to close the distance that still lingered between them. Her hand lifted before she could stop it, hovering inches from his chest. She felt the heat radiating from him, stark against the chill of the chamber. The Duke caught her wrist gently, his thumb brushing her pulse. His eyes burned into hers. Illyra, he said, her name a warning and a plea all at once. If you reach for me now, there will be no going back. The chamber stilled, the whispers holding their breath. Her pulse hammered beneath his touch. And if I don't, she whispered. His jaw flexed, his grip tightening. Then the palace will keep haunting us. And I. I will keep restraining myself until it breaks me. The honesty in his voice cracked something inside her. The Duke, master of composure, confessed more in that moment than any mirror could show. She took a trembling step forward. His hand slid from her wrist to her fingers, entwining them with his. Their reflections surged with motion, every mirrored version of themselves collapsing into a single image, lips meeting, bodies pressed close, desire no longer restrained. The chamber pulsed, light flaring brighter than before, the whispers erupting into a chorus of triumph. The Duke lowered his forehead to hers, his breath warm, ragged. But still, he did not close the final distance. "Choose, Illyra," he murmured, voice rough with restraint. "Let it be your will, not the palace's." Her lips parted, her breath mingling with his. Every nerve in her body screamed for release. The chamber trembled, as though the palace itself strained against her hesitation. At last, Illyra whispered, "I choose." The rest of her words vanished as the palace walls shuddered violently, light spilling from every reflection at once. The chamber had reached its limit. Her choice, whether spoken or not, was already binding. The Duke's arms closed around her as the ground cracked beneath their feet. Shards of ice reflected their entwined forms again and again as the chamber collapsed into blinding light. And Illyra knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the breaking point had come. Light engulfed the chamber, searing and cold all at once. Illyra clung to the Duke, her body pressed against his as the palace seemed to convulse around them. The mirrors shattered outward in silent explosions, fragments spinning through the air like frozen stars. Each shard caught a reflection of them kissing, touching, yielding as though the palace itself demanded the outcome. And then, just as suddenly, silence fell. They stood in a vast new hall, one unlike any Illyra had yet seen. The walls were not carved of ice but of translucent crystal, glowing faintly with an inner fire. Above them, no ceiling, only a vault of stars, sharp and endless. The whispers were gone. Only her heartbeat and the Duke's ragged breath filled the space. "Illyra." His voice was hoarse, his grip on her firm as though afraid she might vanish. "The palace has brought us to its heart. It will not release us until we finish what it began." She swallowed hard, lifting her gaze to his. His restraint trembled visibly now, every muscle tight with the effort to hold back. The man who had stood untouchable in marble halls, whose icy reputation matched the palace itself, now looked as though a single word from her could unravel him entirely. And she realized she wanted to be the one to unravel him. Her fingers slid up his coat, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath. "Then let it end," she whispered. "Not with fear. Not with chains. With truth." Something broke in his expression: relief, hunger, a surrender he had denied for too long. His lips claimed hers before another breath could pass, the kiss fierce, searing, and undeniable. The cold air dissolved into heat that coursed through her veins, thawing every part of her she had kept frozen for years. The palace pulsed around them, its walls glowing brighter, feeding on their release. Shards of light cascaded like falling snow, each one bursting with warmth instead of chill. For the first time, Illyra felt the palace not as a predator but as a witness, exulting in their choice. The Duke deepened the kiss, his hands framing her face with reverence and urgency. When he pulled back just enough to speak, his breath was uneven, his voice raw. "You carry your desire like ice," Illyra preserved, enduring. "I cannot hold back against it any longer." "Then don't," she breathed, her body trembling with the truth of her words. "Don't hold back from me." And he didn't. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing, pressing her against the crystalline wall. Heat and cold mingled, the surface behind her chilling her back while his body burned against her front. The contrast was dizzying, intoxicating. Their mouths met again and again, each kiss deeper, hungrier, until the last remnants of restraint shattered. His hands traced the lines of her body through layers of fabric, and wherever he touched, fire seemed to bloom beneath her skin. She clung to him, no longer fearing her hunger but embracing it, reveling in how it matched his. The palace responded in kind. The crystal walls flared with aurora colors: green, violet, crimson, rippling like banners of ecstasy. The stars above seemed to blaze brighter, as if the heavens themselves bore witness. "Illyra," he murmured against her lips, his voice ragged with need. "Do you feel it? The palace accepts us. It releases its hold." But she hardly heard him, too lost in the rush of sensation, in the truth that had finally broken free inside her. For years she had fled her own heart, hiding behind fear and restraint. Here, in the heart of ice, she had chosen differently. And in choosing, she had freed not only herself but the man whose secret mirrored her own. When at last they broke apart, foreheads resting together, the chamber softened. The auroras dimmed to a gentle glow, the crystal walls humming like a lullaby. The fissures in the floor sealed, the air warming with finality. The palace no longer whispered or demanded, it was silent, sated. They stood in the hush, breathless. The duke's hands lingered at her waist, reluctant to let go. "We have given the palace what it craved," he said softly. "But more than that, we have given it to each other." Illyra's lips curved, though her heart still raced. "And what now?" His pale eyes searched hers, no longer guarded but bare, vulnerable. "Now, we leave. Not as strangers carrying secrets, but as two who no longer fear them." Outside the hall, the crystal doors parted, revealing dawn breaking over the snow-laden world. The storm had vanished, leaving only clarity. Hand in hand, they stepped through, the palace fading behind them like a dream. Yet Illyra knew the truth: what had awakened within her was no dream. It was fire preserved in ice, desire unbroken by fear. And as the duke's fingers tightened around hers, she understood that neither of them would ever walk unchanged again.